Welcome to the Chronicles of a Cheating Wife channel. A new story every day. Don't forget to subscribe. I stare at the empty glass in my hand. I can see the faint distortion of my reflection on its curved surface. The lines on my face look harsher, deeper, more pronounced than they did a year ago. I tilt the glass a bit, noticing a small chip on the rim. A chip I never bothered to fix. Maybe that says more about my life than I'd like to admit. I set the glass down on the countertop. My hand hovers for a moment, as if uncertain whether to pick it back up or push it away. My reflection is still there in the polished marble of the kitchen island. All I see is a man at the edge, unsteady, uncertain. My shoulders feel tight, as though I've been bracing for a punch to the gut that just won't land. My neck is stiff, and in the bottom of my stomach there's a cold weight that won't dissolve. I breathe in deeply, forcing air into my lungs until they burn, then exhale in a long, trembling sigh. Outside, the morning light slips through the blinds, catching on dust motes in the air, reminding me of a past that feels at once too close and too far. The house is quiet, an oppressive hush pressing on my eardrums. I can't remember the last time I felt genuine peace in this place. It's supposed to be home. For 2 decades I thought it was. I want to tell you how it all fell apart. How I woke up one morning, poured a cup of coffee, opened the newspaper, and my entire life cracked like that chipped rim on the glass. That's the image steered into my mind. Black coffee steaming in my left hand, cheap local paper in my right, the smell of stale newsprint mixing with bitterness from the beans. At first, I flipped through headlines without much interest. Some political scandal, a local sports victory, until I landed on the 3rd page. That's when I saw them. The photo was small, near the bottom of the page. My wife, Ellie, wearing that red coat I gave her on our 20th anniversary. A fancy event with city officials and business leaders. I recognized the man standing behind her. His hand was on the small of her back, exactly where my hand used to rest. He's leaning in, a wide grin across his face, a shining endorsement of success and confidence. The caption read, "Businessman of the Year and his new muse." I'm not sure which half of that sentence hit me harder. Businessman of the Year, or the phrase new muse. Both cut equally deep. That moment, it changed something in me. My face burned hot, and for a few seconds, I felt a surge of raw, pulsing fury. Then it all went hollow. It was like I'd been gut-punched and left in a vacuum. I thought about the way she used to smile when I was the one standing beside her in pictures, how her eyes shone at me during our better days. Now those eyes shine for someone else, and apparently for the entire city to see. I don't recall finishing my coffee. I just remember my hand shaking so badly I had to put the mug down before I spilled it everywhere. Next thing I knew, I was out in the park, on the bench, the same local paper crumpled beside me. My thermos of coffee turned cold, but I kept drinking it, swallowing that bitterness over and over again, reminding myself that if I was still drinking, I was still alive. Barely. It was a quiet day in the park, birds chirping overhead, a couple of joggers passing by. Nobody knew the man on the bench was busy watching his marriage dissolve into newsprint right before his eyes. Time crawled. At some point, I forced myself to stand, knees wobbling, and drove back home. Ellie was out, probably at work, her marketing job that she seemed to enjoy more and more these days. Or maybe she wasn't at work at all. Maybe she was with him. My heart pounded with each guess. I realized the hollow feeling in my gut was merging with a savage sense of rage. I fought to keep it contained. I told myself not to do anything stupid. Not yet. The next few days blurred. I went to my office. Tried to lose myself in half-finished construction plans for a new residential project. I tried to be normal. Ate dinner alone. Heard her come in at night, offering a quick greeting from somewhere near the door. But I couldn't see her face in the dark hallway. She didn't ask me how my day was. I didn't ask her either. The silence was more telling than any conversation. On the third night after I saw that cursed newspaper article, I found myself in front of the mirror in our bedroom, just staring. I saw the lines on my forehead, the sag of my shoulders, the way my hair was thinning at the temples. I saw a man who'd been replaced, someone overshadowed by a bigger, flashier presence. A wealthy, polished individual with unstoppable charm. Because that's what the article called him. A rising star in the entrepreneurial scene. A mogul with unstoppable energy. Meanwhile, I was just a guy who used to design houses, who once had big dreams but settled for stability. My reflection stared back, accusing. My mind raced with questions. Why her? Why him? Was I not enough? Why did I let this happen? Why can't I just speak to her about it? My throat felt tight. I didn't want to cry. Men my age, we grew up believing tears were a weakness. I can't remember the last time I cried in front of anyone. Maybe at my father's near-fatal heart attack years ago, or was it at my dog's funeral when I was a boy? But now, tears threatened to break me. I clenched my fists, forced them down, and took a raspy breath. That's when I decided I needed to see him, to stare into his eyes, and measure the difference between us. But I wasn't sure how I'd do it without losing the last shred of dignity I had left. I stepped out of the bedroom, walked downstairs. I called him. Yes, I had his number, ironically enough. We'd once discussed a renovation project at the local community center, or so he claimed. That was back when I thought he was just a passing contact of Ellie's, a sponsor for one of her marketing campaigns. My fingers trembled on the phone. Then I pressed the call button. He picked up on the second ring, voice smooth, confident. Hey, Mike. Everything all right? Like we were old pals. I forced a semblance of calm. Yeah, everything's fine. Listen, I was thinking about remodeling our kitchen. Kind of a surprise for Ellie. I know you have a knack for design tastes, at least from what I hear. Thought you might want to give me some input, help me figure out a good approach. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Too cheerful, too rehearsed. He hesitated. Well, I'm not exactly an interior designer, but sure, I can drop by. When's good? Tomorrow afternoon, around 3. Ellie works until 5 or 6, so we can plan without spoiling the surprise. Sounds great. Text me the address. Will do, I said. Then a beat of silence. I could picture him on the other end, maybe wearing an expensive suit, a self-assured grin on his face. See you tomorrow, I managed to add. See you, Mike, he said warmly, as if we were best friends. I hung up. My jaw clenched so hard I felt my molars grind. There was a part of me that still couldn't believe I was going through with this plan. Why am I inviting that man, my wife's lover, into my house? But the moment I realized I had asked the question, I also knew I wouldn't back down. I wanted to see him in my space, to watch him step over the threshold that was supposed to represent our marital sanctuary. I wanted him to feel my presence and sense there was something bigger going on than just picking out cabinet colors. That night, Ellie came home late again. She slipped into bed without a word. I switched off my reading lamp and turned on my side, facing away from her. The space between us felt like a canyon. My mind wouldn't slow down, replaying images of that damn newspaper photo. Finally, exhaustion took me. The next day, around noon, I was pacing in the living room, phone in my hand. I had told him 3, but I kept looking at the clock like a man awaiting his execution, or maybe the arrival of a hurricane. There was a frantic energy in my limbs, as if I wanted to fight or run, but had nowhere to do either. I tried to calm myself, but each time I remembered that picture of his hand on her waist, my head pounded with fresh anger. He arrived a few minutes before 3. He wore a tailored jacket and slacks, no tie, a crisp white shirt with 2 buttons undone, revealing just a hint of chest. I stood at the door, letting him ring the bell twice, savoring the knowledge that he was waiting to enter my domain. Then I opened it. He greeted me with a bright smile, something that probably won over countless investors and clients. Hey, Mike. Good to see you. Man, your house is beautiful. Come on in, I said. My own voice sounded tight, but I forced a polite nod. Let me show you the kitchen. He stepped inside, glancing around. I noticed how casually he carried himself, how sure of each step. This was a man who believed in his own desirability, in his power. I led him through the foyer, into the open-concept living area, then to the kitchen at the rear. He took in the marble counters, the polished cabinets. It's already pretty nice. What do you want to do with it? I shrugged, thinking about a fresh look. Maybe new cabinets, new appliances. My eyes flicked to the side, unconsciously checking the clock. Ellie was due home in half an hour. He walked over to the center island. Dark wood or something more modern? Because these countertops could handle a lot of different styles. He tapped the marble with the confidence of a man who was used to picking the best. I realized he was playing the role of design consultant for me, but behind those green eyes, I sensed no guilt, no hesitation, just charm. He was in my house, offering me advice while he was secretly taking my wife for himself. The reality of it made my stomach turn. I forced myself to engage, pointing at the ceiling. Might want to install recessed lighting or pendant fixtures. You know, lighten the mood. My words came out stilted, and I could feel a sheen of sweat on my forehead. He gave a cordial nod, still oblivious to my real intentions. As we circled back toward the living room, the front door opened. I saw her silhouette in the hallway. Ellie. She had grocery bags in one hand, her purse slung over the other shoulder. She was wearing that same red coat. My heart pounded so hard, it might have cracked my ribs. Beside me, I felt him stiffen slightly, though he tried to hide it. I glanced his way, saw his face light up, though he quickly fought to keep it neutral. Ellie looked at us. She didn't speak. I swallowed, trying to calm the wave of adrenaline. Hey, I said to her, trying to keep my voice steady. I asked him to stop by. Figured we could plan something nice for the kitchen. She stayed silent, her eyes flicking between us. When she stepped forward into the light, I noticed faint marks on her neck, almost like bruises or the faintest outline of lips. My gut twisted with both anger and a sickening pang of anguish. Did he do that to her? Did she let him? The moment stretched. I forced a tight smile. Let me take those bags for you. I reached, and she handed them over without a word. I led her toward the kitchen. He followed. She avoided his gaze, staring instead at the floor or the walls. I found myself simultaneously grateful she wasn't playing up any affectionate gestures in front of me, and furious that she wouldn't even look me in the eyes. Did she feel ashamed? Sorry? Defiant? I set the grocery bags on the counter, motioned for both of them to stay put. Door's a bit jammed, I said, walking back toward the entryway. I need to check the latch. My heart throbbed like a drum in my chest. This was it. The moment I'd planned. My hand found the deadbolt. I clicked it shut. A feeling of finality washed over me. I returned to them. So, I said, voice clipped, I think we have a situation. Door's not working right. Let me see if I can fix it. I gave him the kind of smile that probably looked more like a grimace. He frowned, heading that way to investigate. But I moved past him and locked the secondary security latch as well. He turned back, uncertain. Is this normal? I shrugged, my voice dangerously calm. Maybe you two should ask yourselves what's normal around here these days. The confusion on his face lasted only a second before a flicker of realization dawned. I glanced at Ellie. She stood there, stiff, silent, like a statue. I wondered if she'd speak up, offer some explanation or apology. But she just stared at me with wide eyes. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and pressed 911. He noticed, stepping forward. Mike, what are you doing? I breathed in. I think there's been an invasion of my privacy. I said, voice steady. I need the authorities to handle it. He gaped. Listen, we can talk. He glanced at Ellie for support, but she didn't say a word. Her silence was deafening. I held the phone to my ear. The operator answered, and I spoke in a calm, clipped tone, stating my address and adding, "There are 2 people in my house I believe have no right to be here." "Yes, I'm the homeowner." He stared at me in disbelief. Ellie's face was pale. She looked like she wanted to vanish. I hung up and pocketed the phone. Then I just stood there, arms at my sides, my entire body shaking internally, though I kept my outward composure. Nobody moved. For a moment, the 3 of us might have been mannequins in some bizarre display. I forced myself to look at her, my wife, the woman I'd spent 20 years with, the mother of my child, who'd moved out for college, the person who, once upon a time, I'd planned an entire future with. I parted my lips to speak, but only a breath came out. The wave of heartbreak nearly buckled my knees. Then I turned to him, this tall, well-groomed businessman who took everything for granted. My voice sounded eerily calm. "I suggest you wait by the door. The police will be here soon, unless you want to break a window and let the whole neighborhood see you do it." He looked at Ellie, perhaps expecting her to intervene, to speak up, to soothe me, or talk sense into me. But she remained silent. She didn't take a step toward him, didn't come to me either. She just folded her arms over her chest, her coat collar still turned up, half hiding the marks on her neck. Minutes ticked by in a suffocating hush. At one point, I heard a car door slam outside. Then footsteps. My neighbor from across the street, an older retiree with a penchant for gossip, peered in through the window. I saw his phone held up. He was recording. The lover, that smug bastard, noticed and grimaced, adjusting his jacket as if trying to keep a shred of dignity. It felt like an eternity before the knock came at the door. I unlocked it, letting 2 officers in. One was a woman in her early 40s. The other was a tall, broad-shouldered man. They scanned the scene, exchanging a quick look of confusion. "What's the issue here, sir?" the male officer asked, eyeing me, then shifting his gaze to the other 2. "They came into my house," I said quietly, pointing to the man. "I let him in under false pretenses, it seems, and that's my wife. But—" I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I believe there's an issue of trespassing, and of an affair that's none of my choosing." The female officer frowned. "Sir, an affair is not exactly a crime. What are you reporting?" I forced myself to stand tall. "I'm reporting an invasion of my personal life, an intrusion. I want them both out." My voice threatened to crack, but I kept it together. I needed official witnesses. They exchanged a look. The man officer cleared his throat. "Unless a restraining order is in place, this is more of a domestic dispute. Are you requesting that your wife and this gentleman leave the premises?" "Yes," I said. "I want them gone. I want it on record that I asked them to leave." My eyes flicked over to the neighbor's phone pressed against the window. "It's all being documented anyway." A tense pause. Then the officers escorted them to the door, stepping outside into the bright daylight. My neighbor's phone was indeed streaming, maybe to social media, maybe to the entire world. At that point, I didn't care. Let them see. Let them all see. He walked out first, his face a rigid mask. Before leaving, he tried to mutter something to me, maybe an apology or a threat. I didn't listen. Ellie followed, head bowed, arms wrapped around her coat. She still didn't utter a single word. Not to me, not to them. She simply left. The officers asked me a few more questions, took a brief statement, then suggested couples counseling, or at least that I speak to a lawyer. I nodded absently. After they left, I stood in the middle of my living room, feeling the echo of silence. It was done, in a way. The confrontation, the revelation, but it felt anything but resolved. I stayed outside on the porch after they'd gone, lighting a cigarette, a habit I'd given up years ago. My hands shook, but I took a drag anyway. The neighbor from across the street gave me a sympathetic nod, still holding his phone. Then he slowly backed away, probably to upload his footage. I wondered if I'd be the next local internet sensation. Betrayed husband calls the cops on cheating wife. A part of me found a sick satisfaction in that thought. Another part of me felt only emptiness. In the days that followed, I decided I'd have no more illusions in my life. I sold everything. Our house, the spare car, the boat we'd only used a handful of times. When Ellie realized I was liquidating assets, she tried to reach me by phone. I never picked up. She showed up at the lawyer's office once, but I refused to meet her gaze. She remained silent anyway. Perhaps she was relieved that I was leaving her the smaller car, or that I didn't contest her portion of the proceeds. I didn't care. I was done. I started sleeping on a friend's couch in a cramped apartment downtown. That friend eventually moved out of state, and I spent another couple of nights at a cheap motel near the freeway. I had enough money, of course, to rent something nicer, but it felt almost cleansing to live as a minimalist, not pinned down by memories or furniture or the illusions of a stable marriage. Often, I caught myself thinking of him, of the difference between us. He's younger, wealthier, more daring. Could I ever have matched that? Did I even want to? I remember the day I found out about the success of his new restaurant chain. My wife posted a congratulatory note on social media. She never posted about me, not in years. That's the kind of petty detail that gnawed at me, reminding me I'd been overshadowed. I asked myself, am I that forgettable? The question stung so badly I could hardly breathe. But maybe that's the point of this entire fiasco. There comes a moment when a man either crumbles or chooses to stand up straighter. I realized that I might have lost my wife, my house, the image of my perfect life, but I hadn't lost my integrity. I got rid of what tied me down because I refused to keep living a lie. I started making calls to prospective buyers. The house sold quickly, given the market. The boat was gone within a week. A coworker of mine had admired that boat for years. He jumped at the chance. As for the second car, I posted it online and found a buyer in a couple of days. Each time I signed over a piece of property, I felt lighter, as if each item was a chain on my neck. Maybe it was. Maybe I only bought that stuff to keep up appearances. During that final week in the house, while I was boxing up some old photo albums and personal documents, I found that red coat stuffed in the corner of the downstairs closet. It carried a faint scent of Ellie's perfume, an almost floral sweetness I used to find comforting. I stared at it, remembering how proud I was the day I surprised her with it. She had laughed and kissed me, saying it was the color of passion and love. Now it just felt like an insult, a symbol of my foolish belief that we'd last forever. I tossed it into the box with some random household items, then labeled the box, Charity. The final, bitter punctuation on our life together. The day I left the house for good, I took one last walk through the empty rooms. Our bedroom looked smaller without the furniture. The living room echoed with every step. The entire place felt like a vacant stage where the cast had taken their final bow. I could almost hear the applause of onlookers who'd watched the spectacle of our downfall. Maybe the neighbor was among them, phone in hand, filming the grand final. I half expected Ellie to show up, to stand in the doorway and ask me to reconsider. She never appeared. In a moment of masochistic curiosity, I checked local news sites to see if there was any mention of that day with the police. There wasn't much. A single viral video clip on a neighborhood gossip page, where the comments mostly ridiculed or sympathized. Some people called me petty, others called me a hero. A few said things like, he should have just left and kept his dignity. Another responded, at least he made it clear he wouldn't be walked over. My chest felt tight reading those comments, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Was I petty or a hero? Maybe both, maybe neither. All I knew was that I did what I had to do. I closed the browser, shutting out the noise. After that, I started driving, heading out of the city. The trunk of my car had just the essentials: clothes, my laptop, important documents, a few keepsakes that mattered to me. I felt an odd sense of calm as the city skyline shrank in the rearview mirror. There's freedom in letting go of illusions. It doesn't feel good, but it feels clean. When I finally stopped, it was at a rest area off the highway, the sun setting behind a ridge of pine trees. I got out of the car, stretched my stiff legs, and leaned against the side door. I reached for my thermos, an old metal container that still carried the faint aroma of strong black coffee. It reminded me of the day in the park, when I first saw that newspaper. So much had happened since then. I lifted the thermos, took a sip of lukewarm coffee, and grimaced at the bitter taste. No illusions left indeed. I wish I could say I felt triumphant, but mostly I felt numb. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an old college friend asking how I was doing. I thought about replying with the truth. I'm still breathing. Everything else is complicated. But I just locked the screen. Another text came from an unknown number. I suspected it might be Ellie, so I refused to look. I moved on to the next town. Booked a small motel room. Checked in, ignoring the curious glance of the clerk at the desk. The place smelled of cheap detergent and stale cigarettes, with a flickering sign outside that cast a pale neon glow through the curtains. I set my bag down, sat on the bed, and let my head fall into my hands. My entire life, undone in a matter of weeks. 20 years of marriage, a house we called home. The security I thought was unshakable, gone. Because of a newspaper photo, sure, but also because of what that photo represented. A reality I was too blind to see. Or maybe I saw it, but lacked the courage to face it. I recalled the day we married, her in a simple white dress, smiling, that sparkle in her eyes. I felt a twisting ache in my chest. I know what they say. A real man endures. He doesn't cry. He doesn't break. Maybe I believed that once. Maybe I still do, in some form. But the truth is, I've been close to breaking so many times. It's not that men don't feel. It's that we try so hard to contain it. So I sat there in that rundown motel with a swirling storm of anger, sorrow, relief, and shame churning inside me. In the end, my eyes remained dry, though my throat felt tight enough to strangle me. The next morning, I drove farther north, following signs to smaller towns I'd never seen before. The road was lined with tall evergreens. The crisp air smelled faintly of pine. I tried to recall the sense of possibility I used to have before everything became complicated. Back when Ellie and I were first building a life, we talked about traveling cross-country, about renovating an old farmhouse, about everything. She used to believe in me. I used to believe in us. Now I believed only in movement, in going forward so I wouldn't sink. Days turned into a couple of weeks on the road. I didn't have a firm plan, only a vague idea that I might stay somewhere near the mountains, maybe find a little cabin to rent short-term. In the midst of these meandering thoughts, I found a piece of what I can only call acceptance. It started as a faint ember, a small spark that told me, you might be lost, but at least no one's lying to you anymore. That thought grew. I realized that for all the heartbreak, at least I wasn't living a delusion. That gave me a strange sense of peace. One afternoon, as I sat at a roadside diner with a half-eaten sandwich and a black coffee, I decided to call my mother. She still lived in Illinois, in the quiet suburb where I grew up. I hadn't spoken to her since before all this. She answered after a couple of rings, her voice bright, but quickly turning concerned when she heard my tone. I told her I was traveling, that I'd sold the house, that Ellie and I wouldn't be together anymore. She gasped, asked a flurry of questions. I kept my answers short, calmly telling her I was all right. I just needed to reset my life. She offered to let me stay with them for a while. I politely declined. I couldn't go back there, not yet. We ended the call with her worried promise to pray for me. I said thanks. Then I put my phone away. A few days later, I found a small cabin listed on a local real estate site. It was run down, needed some repairs, but the price was within reach. Surrounded by tall pines, next to a clear running stream. Maybe that was the next step. Fix a place up from scratch. Use my construction background to rebuild not just a house, but myself. The idea lodged itself in my mind, and I followed it. When I arrived to check out the property, I stood in front of the creaking porch, hearing the wind whistle through the pine needles. The air smelled of damp earth. The cabin was small. The roof needed some serious work. The windows looked ancient. But I felt a faint stirring in my chest that whispered, "This is something you could make your own." No ghosts of her memory in these walls. No fancy illusions. Just a structure that needed time, effort, and a plan. I ended up purchasing it with some of the money left over from the sale of our house. The price was almost laughable compared to city real estate. The owner was an elderly man who just wanted to move south to be near his grandchildren. We shook hands, and that was that. My next step had found me. Within days, I was sweeping out cobwebs, patching holes, planning how to fix the roof. I worked from sunrise to sunset, my muscles aching in that old, familiar way from years back when I first started in construction. I found it oddly comforting to be physically tired at the end of the day. Each swing of the hammer was a release, a chance to let the anger and sorrow drain through my arms into the nails and the wood. Sometimes, while I worked, I caught myself drifting, remembering Ellie's silent stare in the kitchen, the tension in her eyes, and I'd wonder what she was doing now. Was she living with him? Had she moved on, as quickly and confidently as I suspected? That old jealousy still simmered, reminding me of how he held her. But then I'd shove the memory aside, focusing on the raw, tangible act of building something. At least the walls here wouldn't lie to me. Weeks rolled into a routine. I woke up early, made coffee on a battered old stove, ate simple meals, spent the day mending, sanding, painting. The sense of progress was slow but steady. With each improvement, the cabin felt more like a refuge, a place that existed outside of betrayal or shame. My phone rang occasionally, often from old friends or from my mother, wanting to see how I was doing. I seldom answered. I preferred the hush of the pines. One afternoon, I ventured into the nearby small town for supplies. The hardware store was cozy, staffed by a couple of middle-aged men who liked to talk local gossip. I wandered the aisles, collecting nails, screws, some lumber. At the checkout, one of them recognized me from a previous visit and asked, "How's the cabin shaping up?" I smiled for the first time in what felt like ages. "Slow, but it's getting there," I said. My voice was calmer than it had been in months. "I want to make it livable before the colder weather sets in." He nodded. "You living there alone?" I hesitated, then answered simply, "Yeah, for now." "Good for you. Peaceful out there." He slid the supplies across the counter. "If you need help, let me know." I gave a polite nod. "Thanks, I appreciate it." When I left the store, I realized that short conversation had made me feel almost normal, like a man with a project, not a man with a broken marriage. For a moment, that weight of betrayal slipped off my shoulders. It was such a relief. A few nights later, after installing a new front door, I sat on the porch with a beer. I stared at the tall trees, the sky painted in reds and oranges as the sun dipped behind the hills. My mind wandered to the events that had led me here, locking them in, calling the police, watching them walk out under camera flashes and the neighbor's phone, selling the house, ending everything. Had it really been me who did those things? A wave of complicated emotion washed through me. Satisfaction that I'd taken a stand. Regret that it came to that. Sadness at losing 2 decades of memories. But overshadowing it all was a sense of quiet pride. I hadn't let them crush me, even though they tried in their own way. I didn't do something violent or land in jail. I had let them face the consequences of their humiliation in broad daylight, under the gaze of neighbors and an unforgiving internet. It might have been petty, but it was my petty. And for once, I was done being the doormat. As the sky grew dark, I found myself whispering to the wind, "Would you have said anything at all, Ellie?" Because that question still haunted me. If I had stood there, waited for her explanation. Would she have spoken, or would she remain mute, as she had that day? I took another swig of my beer, letting the cold liquid wash away the bitterness in my throat. Maybe I'd never know. Maybe she was so far gone from our marriage that words meant nothing. Maybe she thought silence was kinder. Or maybe she was just too cowardly to face me, to name her betrayal out loud. Whatever it was, the result was the same. I had to move on without answers. Time passed. My cabin neared completion. I replaced rotted floorboards, added fresh paint, installed new windows that let in the sunlight of crisp mornings. I started to find a calm routine in the quiet hours, sipping coffee and planning the day's tasks. At night, I'd read old novels by a dim lamp, or just stare out the window at the moonlit trees. I found a certain contentment in that solitude. Occasionally, I'd recall the details of my old life. The marble counters, the boat, the neat rows of suits in my closet, all the illusions of stability. Now I wore old flannel shirts and jeans streaked with paint. My hands bore calluses from real labor again. My reflection in the mirror, though older, lined with experiences, carried a certain clarity I hadn't seen in years. I looked like a man who understood that illusions have a price. I'd be lying if I said I no longer felt the sting. Sometimes it returned sharply, like a sudden drop in my gut when I remembered her perfume, or a pang of envy if I thought about them together. But at least that jealousy was overshadowed by the knowledge that I was free of their deceit. There was a line from an old friend that came to mind. It's better to know the truth and be wounded than to live in a beautiful lie. I finally understood that sentiment. In those days, I barely used social media, but one evening, out of morbid curiosity, I peeked at Ellie's profile. She'd changed her last name back to her maiden name. Her new photos showed her at some upscale events, wearing elegant dresses, always accompanied by high-status people, though I didn't see him in any pictures. Perhaps she'd realized being too open about their relationship could backfire, or maybe it was over between them. The thought triggered a weird sense of satisfaction, as if it validated my belief that they were built on something shallow. But I wasn't naive enough to think it erased the pain. I closed the page, not wanting to get sucked into the spiral of old wounds. That night, I fell asleep thinking about how ephemeral everything can be. We think we have a handle on our lives. A marriage, a house, a boat, a future. And then it all unravels. Maybe we see the signs but choose to ignore them, or maybe it blindsides us in a single day. All we can do is decide what to do next, how to survive the wreckage. Eventually, I finished the major repairs on the cabin. My modest savings covered everything I needed. I considered picking up local construction jobs, or maybe resuming design consulting from a home office. But for a while, I just let myself exist, content in the knowledge that I could stand on my own. In the mornings, I'd step outside, breathe in the crisp air, and remind myself I wasn't living a lie anymore. Some days, that simple realization felt like victory. People talk about closure. They say you need to confront the one who hurt you, have a long conversation, unravel your emotions, maybe forgive each other. I wondered if that was true, or if it was just pop psychology, because I never got that conversation. Ellie never gave me a single word of explanation, or an apology, or even an angry outburst. It was like she was determined to pretend her voice didn't matter, that the unspoken betrayal was easier to leave undefined. And I had to learn how to find closure alone. Still, I think back to that locked door sometimes. The click of the deadbolt, the look on his face when he realized I knew, the stunned silence from her, the neighbor's camera rolling, the footsteps of the cops. In those few minutes, my entire reality was lit up like a stage. I felt raw, exposed, but also weirdly strong, like I was peeling away layers of polite denial to reveal the ugly truth beneath. And once I saw that truth, there was no going back. In that sense, I guess I found my version of closure. A couple of months later, I decided to take a drive into town to pick up some celebratory supplies. maybe a nice steak, a better bottle of whiskey. The cabin felt complete, cozy enough to call home. As I rolled along the winding road, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I noticed lines around my eyes, a seriousness in my expression that made me look older. Yet my eyes held a quiet certainty. I realized I was no longer bracing for the blow of betrayal. I was living in the aftermath, building something new for myself. That night, I grilled a steak over a makeshift fire pit outside the cabin. The stars overhead were unbelievably bright, and the hush of the forest felt like a lullaby. I ate slowly, savoring each bite. Afterward, I poured whiskey into a sturdy glass, no longer chipped, and watched the moon climb through the tree line. I felt the faintest urge to toast to something. Maybe to my future, to the end of illusions, or to the man I was becoming. So I lifted my glass. The whiskey's aroma filled my nostrils. The rim caught a glint of moonlight. I thought about that old, chipped glass in my old kitchen, about the times I stared at my reflection. And then I thought about now, how I was standing out here under open skies, with no one telling me lies. For a moment, I almost allowed myself to cry, but instead, I just smiled. Because at last, I was a man no one would dare lie to. Not because they feared me, but because they understood I'd never again settle for anything less than honesty. I took a sip, let the warmth spread through my chest. I listened to the breeze rustle the pine branches overhead, the crackle of the dying embers in the fire. And I realized something important. I was alive in a way I hadn't been for a very long time. That realization settled into me like a deep calm. I let out a slow breath, lifting my gaze to the stars. And in the quiet hush of that moment, I understood that sometimes, to truly live, you have to let the illusions burn to ash. Then you sift through what's left, build again, and carry on. And so I stood there, a free man, glass in hand, under a vast midnight sky. And for the first time since everything happened, I felt okay. Not perfect, not whole, but okay. And in this life, that's more than enough.